I do not represent everybody under a particular age, nor do I represent everybody over a particular age. But I happen to be of this like in-between group of people and a big nerd myself. And so one of the things that I find is very personal for me is the tension between the old and the new, the young and the old, the past and the future. And in every single generation, there is that like, get off my lawn, you kids. I don't understand what you guys are all talking about, your fancy rock and roll stuff. And nothing better exemplifies this moment in time to me than Old Economy Steve. And for those of you who don't know it, Old Economy Steve is a popular meme. That's this guy in the photo with the text over top of it. Mostly a kind of millennial bitch fest, if you will, about how older people have rigged the system to not work well for younger people, and how they complain about the attitudes of younger people in the world. And it's easy to dismiss the whining of the millennial generation, let's say, as the folly of youth, or from the perspective of older people who've put more effort into the stuff that they've done. But in practice, I think there's something very fundamental and profound and different about this particular tension, the one that exists today. And one of the things that's very different about this particular tension is, of course, the fact that the perceptual differences between how young people view themselves and how old people view young people could not be wider than they are right now. And this is actually some research from Beyond.com looking at what older people in the workplace thought of younger people in the workplace and what younger people in the workplace thought of themselves. And for those of you who saw this last week, it's actually been amazing because there was also a piece of research out about about the fact that takers of selfies think they're more attractive than they actually are, like way more attractive than they actually are. And in a way, right, like this research sort of reinforces the same kind of idea of, this idea that people who, younger people maybe think they're better at stuff than they are, and older people think they're worse than they are. But regardless of where you sit on the continuum, whether you believe that young people just need to like buck up and work harder, or you think like old people are just like don't know what they're talking about, everybody can agree that things in the world have changed kind of radically in the last 10 years as it relates to relating to each other, right? Like this picture, just to be clear, this picture, which I know none of you ever do, right? You've never been out to a meal and like spent the whole time like looking at your phone instead of talking to your friends or your family. Okay, so this device is less than 10 years old. And in the last decade, the behavior that's changed, the change of behavior that's occurred has been really shocking. Do you know that today, the average American today will look at this device almost 100 times while they're awake today? 100 times, right? And most of you in the room are like, 100? I did that this morning before breakfast. But it's true, right? And so most people, when they think of like terrible technologies that have irrevocably harmed our society and pitted young and old against each other and destroying the fabric of our lives, most people point to this mobile device, this smartphone, and think it's at the heart of this. But I actually think this has been going on for a little bit longer, and I think it may have started around this time. For those of you who don't recognize this is the Atari 2600. For people of my age, I'm in my very early 40s. For people of my age, this was a defining moment in time that changed our technology kind of pathway pretty dramatically. And I tend to think of the world actually not being divided as much into the millennial generation and like Gen X and older people. I tend to think of the world as being divided into the pre-game generation and the post-game generation. And even if you don't play a lot of video games, even if you yourself are not a video game player or were not a video game player, the importance of the effect of the introduction and popularity of the video game on your society and on the way that you behave may, while imperceptible, nonetheless be one of the most significant things that's ever happened. Because the way that games work on people's brains, a subject which I've studied for a long time and I'm very interested in, the way that games work on people's brains are quite different. And in fact, many of the things in mobile devices and mobile apps that are so engaging and that cause people to look at them 100 times a day, sidebar, when you match with somebody on Tinder, right? It asks you if you want to chat with them or keep playing. The lessons from games that make games so sticky and so addictive have become parts of our society in almost every facet of our interaction. And the reason for that is that games act on the brain differently from other kinds of interactions. And what they do is they wire directly into kind of our reward circuitry, our positive reward circuitry, dopamine in our brain, and they make us feel really good about ourselves in a very short period of time in an ongoing cycle of constant challenge, achievement, and success. And see, every time you achieve something in your life, and you can think about many examples, I'm sure, every time you achieve something in your life, your brain secretes a little bit of dopamine, and then dopamine feels really good, and then you're like, yeah, and I want to do that thing again. Okay, so in the game context, this challenge achievement dopamine loop is happening like hundreds of times per hour. But outside of games, in the regular world, in your working world, in your school world, in the world that we all agree collectively we inhabit, it doesn't happen very often. And so if you grow up in an environment where games are a large part of not only what you consume, but also the way that the other systems you interact with are designed, it's probable that you will eventually find the non-gamified world perhaps a little boring, maybe a little slow, maybe a little lacking. And this, in my mind, is at the heart of what ails us today, not only as an industry, but also broadly creates this conflict in our society. And you see, games have these three things that are really very specific and very particularly important. They're challenge, progress, and connection. And these three things, challenge, progress, and connection, enable a game to allow us to want to play it for longer, and therefore make us want to do this activity in a happy way. Now, contrast this with what you do in your day-to-day life. One of the things that's elemental in a game is the idea that failure is really cheap and easy. What happens when your character dies in a game setting? You just press the button and you start again. And you get to fail really cheaply and really easily. And in fact, today's games are even more sophisticated than that. They start off by letting you succeed really easily, and then bring you into an environment in which failure is really cheap and easy. But in your business, in particular in the nuclear business, failure in the real world is kind of expensive. You're one of those industries that has a high cost for mistakes in the real world. So it's extra important, if failure is such a great teacher, as everybody agrees, that we think about ways we can graft this easy failure learning modality from games into the real world. If everything in your real world is so high stakes that you can never fail, the real world also may feel less ideal and less engaging. The second thing about games that's really important from a structural standpoint is the progress system is relatively clear. A game lays out for you up front that you can expect there to be levels, and each level has these activities, and once you complete them, you move forward, and when you finish 47 levels, you clear the board, and you keep playing Candy Crush, and then you're on level 800, and okay, right? There's a progress system that's somewhat clear. Consider how clear is the progress system in your career path, in your companies, in your organizations. We get that there is a progress system, but how clear is it? And how many paths are there? Can there really only be this like one mode to being the CEO of the company? If so, how do people feel like they make progress in that context? And when we combine the ability to fail cheaply and the ability to feel progress, we can do really great things in science. And one of my favorite examples is this app called Foldit. So folding proteins is an essential way of discovering protein structures and new drugs. And scientists had been stumped for many years on an elemental protein in the fight against HIV. This was this one protein that they could not sequence, they could not figure out how it was structured, and they're building software to try to do it, and nobody can do it, and they come up with this great idea. They're like, okay, humans could do folding, even though it's technically complicated, it's a very math-intensive process. Humans can do folding, but we need to try to convince people to want to do this hard thing. Can we gamify the process of folding proteins and see if people will do it? And so after 15 years of being stumped in solving this protein structure for HIV, in 11 days, 49,000 people playing Foldit cracked the code for this particular protein. Now, let me tell you what's really exciting about it. This is not easy. This is not planting a fake garden and harvesting tomatoes. This is not swiping gems on a screen. Folded is actual math, real, actual, genuine math to fold proteins, a thing that normally you're only qualified to do as a grad student in STEM. And of those 49,000 people who played Fold It, fully half of them had no STEM education whatsoever. So half the people involved in this real science problem didn't have the background necessary. And that was because it was easy to make progress, it was easy to fail, and it was easy to see how that would work. And when we take the power of that, those ideas, and we talk about connecting people in a project or a process, one of my favorite examples of that is a Duolingo, which some of you might know as a method of learning languages. Okay, so the way the Duolingo works is you pair off with somebody pretty much in playing this game, and in doing so, you translate the internet in the process of doing it. So you're translating documents and you're translating the internet, and the two of you are playing a game together to learn a new language. In the first 2 years of Duolingo's existence, 200 million people, that is half the population of the United States, learned a new language using Duolingo. In 2 years, more than pretty much we think the sum total of all the Rosetta Stone, Berlitz people over the course of my lifetime ever, learning a new language online from this process of connection. And that's because this generation and the people who play games, a Generation G, the gamer, needs to be connected to other people and wants to be connected, and that connection is actually really important. So, all right, so we've got these cool examples. What about our work lives? What's it like in the office? What's it like doing your jobs every single day? And one of the great challenges I find, I work with a lot of organizations, both associations and direct companies, and one of the big challenges is that while all this cool stuff is happening in the outside of the office environment, there's the Duolingos and the Fold-Its of the world, in most offices it's still pretty much like a scene from Office Space, that movie, asking for the TPS reports and hanging out in your cube, and pretty kind of boring environment. And I think that there's a core reason, and it's important to ask why things are this way and whether or not they always have to be this way. And in order to understand the why things are boring, we also have to understand a really important part of human psychology, and that's called habituation, okay? So habituation is the way that your brain gets used to things, that it gets bored of things, that it becomes accustomed to stimuli, that it turns down all the outside noise. And this is actually a very important evolutionary step for humans. Habituation, boredom, is actually really important because if you didn't get bored of stuff, so if you couldn't turn down the volume on every new stimulus, you would never be able to focus enough to get anything done, right? Right now, listening in this room, you would be constantly thinking oh my God, it's so cold in here. Oh my God, this person smells. There's a loud hum, right? All of these things are stimuli in the room. But magically, even though you noticed all of those things when you sat down at first, after a period of time, they fade away and you get to focus on the important thing, right? The guy standing up the front of the stage and talking to you and the things that you're learning. So this habituation skill is incredibly important for us overall, but the dark side of habituation is that it makes people bored of stuff pretty quickly. And my favorite example of this comes from research in Denmark. And these researchers were looking at couples and their relationship with each other because over time, the psychologists there had found that couples would come in and say, our relationship's not the same as it was at the beginning. We don't feel the same way, we don't act the same way that we do. So the researchers were like, is that normal? Okay? So they looked at 15,000 couples, and what they found was that on average, after about year 2 in a relationship, couples shift from what's called romantic affection to companionship affection, okay? So I know this doesn't apply to any of you in the room, because this isn't what your relationships are like, but this is the average person, okay? The first 2 years are oh yeah, you are really hot. This is amazing, right? And then after year 2, waking up every morning, you're like, we are awake. This is great. Okay, so the point was this was normal. Okay, now put this, I'm just gonna put this out there. Just gonna put this out there. A sexual and intimate relationship with the hottest person you can convince to sleep with you on a regular basis without compensating them has, it's an important qualifier. It ruins the whole story if I don't put it in. Has a 2-year lifespan before it becomes everyday, normal workaday life. So what does a job have to do to get and keep a person's attention, to have them excited and enthusiastic every day coming in, day in and day out, if that's where our habituated brains are set? We love to talk about how young people can't focus on something because the phones and the games, But actually, this is not about young and old. This is not about young and old. This is about the brain, and the brain gets bored. And in order to keep things interesting, you've got to play to that part of the brain. You've got to say, we need to make things more dynamic, and things need to be reflexive to the person playing them. One size does not fit all. And so I want to share a couple of examples of companies and organizations that I think are doing this super well, and a couple of ideas, and I'll let you guys get to the rest of your lives. So this is a project that we worked on for a large consultancy, a big global consulting firm. And let me preface this by saying they are not an exciting company, okay? They're lovely people, but I promise you, they're no more exciting than any utility that you can imagine, okay? And one of the things that they needed to do was connect their global employee base, because they've got people all over the world, a couple 100,000 people, all different languages, all different ethnic backgrounds, all different cultural experiences, and inculcate them into the firm and teach them the different things that the firm could do and all the different capabilities of the firm globally. And so we built this solution called Globe Runner for them, which is basically a where in the world is Carmen Sandiego for the corporate set. Enabling them to travel around the world inside the company's framework and learn and adapt and understand the different things that the organization is doing. And to date, it is the best reviewed, the highest used, the most popular tool, internal tool the company has ever rolled out to its employees. There's nothing that even comes close to the popularity of this. And we're talking about in countries like Saudi Arabia and countries like the United States and Canada. So we're talking about places where there's vastly different cultural appreciations for these kinds of corporate interactions. Another one that I especially like from Delta Airlines. So many of you, of course, know Delta, and a number of years ago, Delta decided to onshore their customer service again and realized they had to train a bunch of people. And needless to say, the American education system doesn't do a great job with geography. And geography is a big thing if you're running an airline. So they had to train a lot of people on a lot of stuff that they just didn't know a lot about. And so Delta said, well, look, there's just no way we're going to be able to do this the traditional way, the corporate training way, So they built these games called Ready, Set, Jet, which are little mini games that you can play to learn about the Delta way, the Delta reservation system, and worldwide geography. And in the first year of Ready, Set, Jet at Delta's like 140,000 employees. In the first year, Delta employees did 4 years worth of training in 1 year using Ready, Set, Jet. Now, I know because you guys work in a regulated environment, you have been in corporate training before. Now I want you to think back to it. Is there any corporate training that you've done where you've been like, I'd like to do 4 times as much of this as we just did? This was amazing, right? Right? Most corporate training is like, okay, everybody, we're here today. Do not sexually harass anyone. Sexual harassment is bad, right? Do not blow up the plant. That would be bad. Okay, so it's like, this is really a huge shift. And the coolest part about the Ready, Set, Jet story, the coolest part, is that the top 2 players in Ready, Set, Jet are 2 like 50-something women who live in the Midwest. They are far and away the dominant players of Ready, Set, Jet. And they start every day with each other like, hey, Marge, hey, Susan, how's it going? They can talk to each other in the game. And they're like, I'm going to kick your ass today. Seriously. Like pushes all their buttons. It's really cool. The other interesting thing about Ready, Set, Jet was that in that first year of operation, the game was not playable during working hours. So it was an optional activity that you could do of your own volition. So that is how high the bar can be set. You can take corporate training from literally the least good thing a company can do to literally the thing that the employees most want to do with their day, simply by thinking of it through the prism of maybe my employees are not prisoners of my company, and maybe we can build something that's gamified and interesting. And the other quick story I want to tell you is about the implications of big data and employee reviews. So one of the things that some really advanced companies like Spotify and Facebook have done is they have completely done away with the annual review, right? Because annual reviews are, maybe next to corporate training, the least amusing thing that you can possibly do with your time, right? Most annual reviews are like, they totally feel like you go into your boss's office, right? And your boss is like shown up, you haven't probably seen him or her for a while. And they're like, okay, let's talk about your year. Here's everything you did in the last 2 weeks that I remember. That was pretty good. You're a pretty good person. Here's one thing that doesn't make any sense to you, but that's my complaint, because I have to have one thing, right? Even though I don't know you at all, I've got to have this one thing on the review because I can't give you all praise. I have to have one thing. And here's your raise, which was already agreed upon before this conversation. You can't negotiate it, but just thought it should be connected to this conversation in some way. And I'll see you in a year, right? Like that's mostly it. And from the manager's perspective, it's like, oh my God, annual reviews are the worst. Oh my God, it's like grading papers for teachers. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do this. And so you put it off and you put it off and you don't remember anything. Frankly, the whole system is broken, right? So the idea, the gamified annual review, the way that it works is everyone in the company has an app, and you can just like praise someone for little action. So basically the premise is every little good action that a staff member takes, whether it's your subordinate, your boss, or your peer, you just like quickly recognize them in the app for that action, right? Like, hey, thanks for getting us coffee. Awesome work on that presentation. Good job not melting the plant down. Love those TPS reports, right? Okay? So you can like, boom, boom, boom. You just give people recognition. And the idea is, instead of there being a giant data funnel that leads to a single interaction of great weight, what happens is we shift to a small amount of feedback, little bits of feedback every single day for all kinds of actions inside the organization, things that should be recognized, okay? So not testing people in a giant test process, but instead a constant process of small tests and small amounts of feedback that in the end result in a large scale change in behavior. And it's been such a significant effect that many of these companies have seen nearly 100% uptake in these reviews when they're given to employees optionally. And one of the things that also comes up a lot in this conversation, you know, I've been talking a lot about millennials and Generation G and younger people, and that's been one of the central tensions of your meeting here, is this like young versus old divide. But everything that I've talked about today, all the stuff that I've talked about, applies equally to older people as it does to younger people. It's not like older people don't want feedback in a timely fashion. It's not like older people don't want a progress system that makes sense to them. It's not that they don't appreciate fun and games. I mean, like, we're on a golf course. Golf is a game, right? It's a game. Frequent flyer programs are a game, okay? Basketball is a game. It's not like old people don't like games. That isn't how this works. It's more so that they just don't have the same expectation as millennials do about what their lives should be like. And even as they're frustrated, I remember my parents frustrated with their careers, frustrated with advancement and the way that things worked, they just didn't think they could or should speak up. And so it falls to the younger generation to speak up, as has always been the way of young people. You have to speak up. Your pressure is what changes things and what makes things kind of work better. But what's interesting about the millennials and what's different about the millennials from previous generations You knew I was going to get to this. What's different about the millennials from previous generations is that instead of just bitching about your company and bitching about the industry and posting about it on social media, all of those things being things that you might reject, what millennials do when they don't like the place they work is they go out and start a competitor. That's what they do differently. That's what they have in common. They live in an environment where more rapid change is possible, where access to startup capital is radically different from before, where the tools for creating new industries and new businesses are much more accessible than they ever have been. And the idea that somebody could start off as just kind of a simple engineer and build something of tremendous value and importance in the world doesn't seem crazy. You don't need an entire government program to make it happen today. Now, the counter perspective to that, and what I want to leave you with, is a quote from Peter Thiel. That's who's on the screen here. Peter, for those of you who don't know, is the founder of PayPal, now billionaire, eccentric as all billionaires are. And one of the things that Peter has spoken about at length is this idea that technology fundamentally stalled in the 1970s. That if you were a child of before the 1970s, and even leading up into the 80s, by now, by 2016, you expected that we would have flying cars. You would have expected that we would be living on Mars, because if you track the progress of technology advancement into the 1970s, that's where we should be now. We should have unlimited, basically free, low environmental impact energy to power all of the things that we should be able to do today. Should. That was the legacy, that was the birthright of the technology industry leading up to the 1970s. And Peter's argument was, somewhere in the early 80s, we took our focus off of fundamental science and technology. We shifted our energy to stuff which is pretty significant and important, like the development of mobile technology. I'm not talking it down, mobile technology is great, right? But the development of mobile technology, the development of search, the development of semiconductors, all of which are really super important. But in the process, so much of the resources, both financial and intellectual, all that capital shifted to doing things which, while important, isn't as important as the fundamental science and technology that gives us big energy breakthroughs, okay? It's just not. And as somebody who has spent his entire career in the software and like networking hardware business, it's quite humbling to be in a room full of people whose job it is to make sure that there is abundant energy to power all the crazy ideas that I have. And make sure that all the things that my peers want to be able to do are not hamstrung by the availability of the fundamental unit of operation that we require, which is energy. It's quite interesting. And yet, this industry overall is viewed as a bit of a dinosaur. Something that's lumbering along and ripe for disintermediation. And I'm sure that if we poll a bunch of Silicon Valley engineers, they'll be like, we're totally going to invent a new energy system, like it's coming out of Stanford, I've seen it. It's cold fusion in a Budweiser can. It totally worked. I know it's happening, okay? I just threw out cold fusion. I don't even know if that's still a thing. But it was a thing when I was a kid. It was like we were going to have cold fusion. Okay, so, right? Okay, so here's the thing. So even though it seems like that is the case, even though it's easy from your perspective to see it that way and from the outside perspective to see it that way, it is more important than ever that you focus on bringing to light the importance of the core element of what you do here as a transformational technology opportunity. In order to do that, you must attract, and you know this, the best and brightest talent from the younger generation of science, technology, engineering, and math graduates to come to your industry to bring new ideas and to innovate out of the box that I think the industry has been in for a long time. And I believe that by addressing some of those structural things, by using the principles of gamification, but also the ideas of this gamer generation, by this opportunity right now, this moment that you're at, is an opportunity to rethink the way your industry works, to rethink the way it's structured, rethink the way jobs operate and innovation occurs. There's a lot of exciting, fresh, new ideas and young blood and energy in this room. And I hope that that by combining that with the power of gamification, you will be able to transform the nuclear business, transform the clean power business, and continue to innovate and give me all the cheap, clean, green energy I need to come up with my crazy, crazy ideas.